The Botany of Desire by Michael Pollan. Picture this. It's spring 1806, and you're standing along the Ohio River. The water's churning with keelboats and barges packed with families heading west into the wild unknown. Then something catches your eye. A bizarre little vessel that doesn't look like anything else on the river. Two hollowed-out logs strapped together like a makeshift catamaran. In one log, there's this skinny guy, maybe 30 years old, just lounging around like he doesn't have a care in the world. He's wearing what looks like a burlap coffee sack as a shirt, and, according to some folks, a tin pot on his head like a hat. He's basically letting the river take him wherever it wants to go. And the other canoe? It's sitting dangerously low in the water, absolutely stuffed with seeds, mountains of them, carefully tucked under moss and mud to protect them from the sun. You might know this guy. His name was John Chapman, though the folks out on the frontier had already given him a nickname, Johnny Appleseed. And those seeds? Apple seeds, enough to plant entire orchards across the wilderness. Now, we all grew up with the Johnny Appleseed story, right? The gentle wanderer planting apple trees for hungry pioneers. But that's the sanitized, Disney-fied version. The real story is way more fascinating, and it reveals something surprising. Those apples weren't meant for eating. They were sour, bitter, and about as pleasant as biting into a lemon. In fact, there was really only one thing they were good for: making hard cider. Johnny Appleseed wasn't delivering a healthy snack to the frontier. He was basically the traveling liquor store of his day. This one twist opens up a much bigger story. It's the story of a book that completely flipped my understanding of the world upside down. It's called The Botany of Desire, written by a brilliant thinker and gardener named Michael Pollan. For years, this book has been quietly passed around from one curious reader to another, because it asks a question so simple yet so mind-bending. We think we're in charge of nature, right? We decide which plants to grow in our gardens and farms. But what if we've been looking at this all wrong? What if the plants have actually been using us this whole time? That's the wild premise of this book, and that's the journey we're about to take together. We're going to see the world from a plant's perspective. We'll explore how 4 ordinary plants, the apple, the tulip, marijuana, and the potato, have cleverly tapped into 4 of our deepest human desires to get us to help them take over the world. By the time we're done, you'll never look at an apple, a tulip, or even a French fry the same way again. You'll see them not as passive things we control, but as active, clever partners in a grand evolutionary dance. And in seeing them differently, you might just start to see yourself and your own desires as part of nature in a way you never imagined before. It all starts in a garden. The author, Michael Pollan, is out one afternoon planting potato seeds, and he's watching a nearby apple tree that's absolutely buzzing with bees. And he starts thinking, what's really the difference between what he's doing, planting potatoes, and what those bees are doing, hopping from one apple blossom to the next? A bee probably thinks it's totally in charge. It sees a flower, wants that sweet nectar, and goes for it. The flower is just sitting there. But we know better, don't we? We know the flower has evolved those gorgeous colors, that irresistible scent, and that sugary nectar for one specific purpose: to trick the bee into becoming its delivery service. The bee gets lunch, but the flower gets its pollen carried to another flower. It gets to reproduce. It's a brilliant arrangement, and scientists call it co-evolution. 2 species, each doing what's best for themselves, end up helping each other thrive. And that's when the question hits him. If the flower is manipulating the bee, who's manipulating him? Did he really choose to plant that potato? Or did the potato somehow make him do it? He thinks back to seeing the potato in a seed catalog. It promised buttery yellow flesh. His mouth watered. His desire kicked in. He ordered the seeds. And now here he is, on his hands and knees in the dirt, doing exactly what the potato needs, helping it make more copies of itself. He'd become the potato's bee. This single, powerful idea is the beating heart of the Botany of Desire. It's the story of how plants have tapped into our deepest desires to spread their genes across the planet. We think we've domesticated them, but in many ways, they've domesticated us. Pollan focuses on 4 fundamental human desires, and the 4 plants that have absolutely mastered them. First up, there's our desire for sweetness, and the surprising story of the apple. As we saw with Johnny Appleseed, the apple's story in America isn't what we learned in school. For centuries, sweetness was rare and precious. Sugar was crazy expensive. For most people, the main source of sweetness came from fruit, and in America, that usually meant apples. But here's the apple's secret weapon. When you plant an apple seed, the tree that grows won't be like its parent. Plant a seed from a red delicious, and you won't get red delicious apples. You'll get something wild, unpredictable, and almost always sour. This genetic variability is the apple's superpower. It means every seed is basically a lottery ticket, a brand new experiment. When the first settlers brought apples to America, their carefully cultivated European varieties struggled. The climate was too harsh. But the seeds they planted, those wild, unpredictable seeds, went to work. They produced millions of new variations, and through trial and error, the apple reinvented itself. It adapted to American soil and seasons. And this is where Johnny Appleseed becomes so important. He wasn't just a folk hero. He was an agent of evolution. By planting thousands and thousands of seeds, not grafted branches that would create identical clones, but wild seeds, he was running a massive genetic experiment across the entire American frontier. He was helping the apple explore its own possibilities. And why did settlers want these sour cider apples so badly? Because frontier life was hard and lonely. Water wasn't always safe to drink. Cider provided a safer, more stable, and let's be honest, more cheerful beverage. It was comfort, social lubricant, and intoxication all in one. For the apple, our desire for sweetness and the alcohol that sugar could become was its golden ticket to conquering a continent. The apple gave us sweetness and alcohol. In return, we became its human bumblebees, spreading its genes from the East Coast all the way to the West. It was a co-evolutionary bargain. But today, that bargain has changed. We've fallen in love with a very narrow idea of what an apple should be. We want uniform, blemish-free, relentlessly sweet fruit. The market is dominated by just a handful of varieties, like the Red Delicious, which Pollan describes as offering, quote, sweetness without dimension. In our quest for the perfect, predictable apple, we've suppressed its wildness. We've traded thousands of unique flavors for a single boring note. The vast genetic library that Johnny Appleseed helped create is slowly disappearing, all because our desire for sweetness has become less adventurous. From sweetness we move to another, perhaps even more powerful desire, beauty, and the incredible story of the tulip. When you think about it, a flower is one of the most extravagantly useless things in nature. You can't eat it. It doesn't provide shelter. And yet, humans across almost every culture have been captivated by flowers. Why? Pollan suggests our attraction might have evolutionary roots. For our hunter-gatherer ancestors, flowers were a reliable sign that fruit and food would soon follow. The brain that was good at noticing and remembering flowers was the brain that led its owner to a meal. Over time, that useful signal, the flower, became a thing of beauty in its own right. But no flower has played on our desire for beauty quite like the tulip. The tulip began as a humble wildflower in the mountains of Kazakhstan, but it had a serious talent for transformation. The Ottoman Turks were the first to become obsessed with it, breeding tulips with long, dagger-like petals that became symbols of power and refinement. But when the tulip arrived in Holland in the 17th century, our desire for its beauty reached absolutely insane levels. This was the time of tulipomania. For a few short years, between 1634 and 1637, this simple flower became the most sought-after and expensive object in all of Europe. People traded their homes, their businesses, their entire life savings, all for a single tulip bulb. At the peak of the frenzy, one bulb of a particularly prized variety, the Semper Augustus, sold for the price of a grand canal house in Amsterdam. What drove this collective insanity? There was a particular kind of beauty. The most valuable tulips were the broken ones. A plain, single-colored tulip might spontaneously break, its petals erupting in intricate feathered flames of a contrasting color. A white tulip might suddenly be streaked with crimson, a yellow one with violet. These patterns were unpredictable, unique, and breathtakingly beautiful. Growers tried everything to make their tulips break. They sprinkled colored powders on the soil, hoping the color would seep into the bulb. They used pigeon droppings and dust from old walls. Nothing worked reliably. The breaking of a tulip seemed magical, almost divine. It wasn't until the 20th century, with the invention of the electron microscope, that the secret was finally revealed. Those beautiful flames weren't magic. They were symptoms of a disease. A virus, spread by aphids, was infecting the tulips and causing their colors to break. This discovery changes everything. For centuries, humans had been selecting tulips for a trait, a sickness, that actually weakened them. A broken tulip produced fewer and smaller offspring. From a purely Darwinian perspective, this makes no sense. Why would a species be rewarded for being sick? But from the virus's point of view, it was brilliant. By making the tulip more beautiful to human eyes, the virus tricked us into spreading it. The more people desired the broken tulips, the more infected bulbs were planted, and the more the virus prospered. It had inserted itself into the coevolutionary dance between plant and person. Pollan uses the tulip to explore the very nature of beauty itself. He describes two opposing forces, which the ancient Greeks personified in their gods. There's Apollo, the god of order, clarity, and form. The classic tulip, with its clean lines and perfect symmetry, is an Apollonian flower. Then there's Dionysus, the god of intoxication, chaos, and wild abandon. Think of a fragrant, overflowing rose. That's a Dionysian flower. True beauty, Pollan suggests, happens when these two forces are held in tension. The broken tulip was so captivating because it was a Dionysian eruption of wild, unpredictable color within the strict Apollonian form of the flower. The virus was the touch of chaos that made the orderly tulip perfect. The apple played on our desire for sweetness, the tulip on our desire for beauty. But there's another desire, one that's darker, more complex, and way more controversial. It's the desire to change not the world around us, but the world within us. This is the desire for intoxication, and its champion is marijuana. Virtually every culture on Earth has used psychoactive plants to alter consciousness. The desire to transcend our everyday minds seems to be a fundamental human drive. We see it in children spinning until they're dizzy, and in the rituals of shamans and priests throughout history. Why do plants produce these powerful, mind-altering chemicals in the first place? Mostly for defense. These molecules are weapons in a silent chemical war against insects and predators. Nicotine paralyzes bugs, caffeine kills their appetite, and the compounds in plants like datura can drive a predator mad with terrifying visions. But somewhere along the line, our curious experimental species discovered that these plant poisons, in the right doses, could do some pretty interesting things to our brains, and a new coevolutionary bargain was struck. The plants that could gratify our desire for intoxication, for transcendence, for a different way of seeing, these were the plants we took under our care. The story of marijuana in modern America is a fascinating case study in this process. When Pollan tried to grow it in the early 80s, it was a lanky, tropical plant, Cannabis sativa, not well suited to northern climates. Most of the pot in America was imported from Mexico or Colombia. But then came the war on drugs. By cracking down on smugglers and spraying foreign fields with herbicides, the government inadvertently created a huge, protected market for domestic marijuana. It was perfect protectionism, even if it was completely accidental. This new, intense pressure changed the plant forever. Outdoor growing became too risky. So growers moved indoors. They started experimenting. They brought in seeds of a different species, Cannabis indica, from Afghanistan. This was a short, stout, potent plant that could flower in northern latitudes. Then, the real revolution began. Amateur breeders, working in secret, started crossing the uplifting, cerebral high of sativa with the potent, compact body of indica. They created new hybrids, like Skunk No. 1 in Northern Lights, that were perfectly adapted to a totally artificial environment, the indoor grow room. Under high-intensity lights, with controlled irrigation and enriched carbon dioxide, the marijuana plant was pushed to its absolute limits. Freed from the constraints of nature, it became something new. Potency skyrocketed. What was once a fairly mild intoxicant became incredibly powerful. The taboo against the plant didn't destroy it. It made it stronger. It's a stunning example of coevolution happening at warp speed. But why do we desire this change in consciousness? Pollan takes us into the world of neuroscience, and the discoveries are mind-boggling. Scientists found that THC, the active compound in marijuana, fits perfectly into a specific receptor in the human brain. This was puzzling. Why would our brains have a lock designed for a key made by a plant? The answer came when they discovered our brains make their own version of THC. They called it anandamide, from the Sanskrit word for inner bliss. We have a built-in cannabinoid system. And what does this system do? Among other things, it helps us forget. We tend to think of forgetting as a failure of memory, but it's actually one of the most important things our brain does. Every second, we're bombarded with a storm of sensory information. If we remembered all of it, we'd be instantly overwhelmed. The cannabinoid system acts as a filter, allowing us to let go of the unimportant stuff, to clear the slate of our consciousness from moment to moment, so we can focus on what matters. Pollan suggests that when we consume cannabis, we're overstimulating this natural forgetting faculty. And this, he argues, is the key to understanding the marijuana high. By temporarily wiping the slate of our short-term memory, the plant allows us to perceive the world as if for the first time. The baggage of past experience, of familiarity, of boredom, is lifted. A familiar song suddenly sounds new and profound. A simple bite of food becomes a revelation of flavor. We're plunged into the intensity of the present moment. This, Pollan proposes, is the forbidden knowledge that psychoactive plants offer, the experience of pure, unadulterated presence. And perhaps this is why it's so often forbidden. Our civilization, built on both capitalism and religious tradition, is fundamentally future-oriented. We're taught to delay gratification, to work now for a reward later, whether it's salvation in the afterlife or a comfortable retirement. A plant that offers fulfillment right here, right now, is a threat to that entire system. It short-circuits the engine of desire that keeps our world running. This brings us to our final desire, the one that most defines our modern world, the desire for control, and its plant is the humble, yet world-changing potato. The story begins with a stark contrast. In the Andes Mountains, where the potato was first domesticated, Inca farmers understood the power of diversity. They cultivated thousands of different varieties: blue, yellow, red, long, round, starchy, waxy, each one perfectly adapted to a specific microclimate. Their system was a complex tapestry, a polyculture that was incredibly resilient. No single disease or pest could ever wipe it out. But when the potato came to Europe, it found a culture obsessed with simplification. This obsession reached its tragic peak in Ireland. The Irish peasantry came to depend on a single food source, the potato. And worse, they came to depend on a single variety, the lumper. For miles and miles, the fields of Ireland were a monoculture, a vast, genetically identical landscape. This system seemed like a miracle of control and efficiency. The lumper grew easily in poor soil and produced huge amounts of food. The population of Ireland boomed. But this illusion of control was built on a foundation of extreme vulnerability. In the summer of 1845, a fungus arrived from America. Phytophthora infestans, late blight. The lumper potato had zero resistance to it. The fungus swept through Ireland like wildfire, turning lush green fields to black, rotting slime almost overnight. The result was the Great Famine. 1 million people starved to death. Another 1 million were forced to emigrate. It was a brutal lesson in the dangers of monoculture, a lesson that nature will always have the final say in our attempts to control it. Which brings us to Pollan's own garden, and his experiment with a potato called the new leaf. This wasn't an ancient heirloom. It was a potato created in a lab by the Monsanto Corporation. It was genetically engineered. Scientists had taken a gene from a soil bacterium called Bt, a gene that produces a natural insecticide, and inserted it directly into the potato's DNA. The result was a plant that produced its own pesticide in every single cell of its leaves, stems, and tubers. It was the ultimate expression of human control. Pollan takes us to the potato fields of Idaho, where industrial farmers are locked in a chemical arms race with nature to grow the perfect, unblemished russet Burbank potato, the only kind that can make those long, golden French fries demanded by companies like McDonald's. They douse their fields with a staggering cocktail of toxic chemicals. One farmer tells him he won't even eat the potatoes from his own fields until late in the season, after the systemic pesticides have faded. From this perspective, the new leaf potato seems like a miracle. It allows farmers to eliminate some of their most toxic sprays. But it's a solution that raises a whole new set of questions. By engineering the plant, we've breached the wall that separates species. We're moving genes from bacteria to plants, from fish to tomatoes. We're rewriting the operating system of life itself, and we're doing it to prop up the same fragile system of monoculture that failed so catastrophically in Ireland. The desire for the perfect, uniform McDonald's French fry, available anywhere in the world, has created a global monoculture of taste. And that monoculture of taste requires a monoculture in the field. Genetic engineering becomes the silver bullet that allows this fundamentally unstable system to continue. But for how long? The insects will eventually evolve resistance to the Bt toxin. Nature will adapt. Our desire for absolute control creates a new, more complex set of problems. As Pollan writes, every step we take towards simplifying nature in the garden or the farm is an invitation to a new kind of disorder. The 4 stories of the apple, the tulip, marijuana, and the potato are really one story. It's the story of a dance that's been going on for 10,000 years. A dance between plant evolution and human desire. These plants have succeeded beyond their wildest dreams because they found a clever, upright ape who was willing to do their bidding. We cleared forests for the apple, spent fortunes on the tulip, risked our freedom for cannabis, and drenched the earth in chemicals for the potato. We became their agents of evolution. And in return, they gratified our desires. They gave us sweetness, beauty, transcendence, and a sense of control over our world. They've changed us as much as we've changed them. The book ends where it began, in the garden. But the garden no longer looks like a place where humans impose their will on nature. It looks like a conversation, a place of give and take. Pollan returns to the image of Johnny Appleseed, drifting down the river. His strange little boat, with the man in one hull and the seeds in the other, becomes a beautiful metaphor for a better way of thinking about our place in nature. Not as masters, but as partners. 2 beings, balanced, side by side, helping each other stay steady on the river of time, heading into a future that belongs to both of them. When you finish a book like The Botany of Desire, the world feels different. It feels more alive, more intelligent, and infinitely more interesting. That, for me, is the mark of truly great work. It doesn't just give you information. It gives you a new lens to see everything through. The most powerful lesson in this book is that simple, profound shift in perspective. We're so used to seeing ourselves as the subjects of history, as the active force in the world, with nature as the passive backdrop. Pollan gently but persuasively asks us to consider that we're also objects of nature's design. Our human desires for sweetness, for beauty, for a change of mind, for order, aren't just cultural whims. They're evolutionary forces, as powerful as a bee's attraction to nectar or a bird's instinct for migration. And the plants have been listening. This matters so much today because we're at a moment in history where our power over nature seems almost absolute. We're editing the very code of life with genetic engineering. We're changing the climate of the entire planet. We hold the fate of countless species in our hands. And in this moment of peak hubris, Pollan's book serves as a vital, humbling reminder. Our control is, and always will be, an illusion. Nature is not a machine to be tinkered with, but a complex, adaptive system that will always have the last word. The story of the Irish potato famine isn't just a historical tragedy, it's a permanent cautionary tale. So what can we do with this new perspective? How does it change the way we live? First, it invites us to be more curious about the everyday things around us. The next time you pick up an apple, don't just see it as a snack. See it as the culmination of a 10,000-year conversation between a plant and a primate. Go to a farmer's market and try a variety you've never heard of, a black twig or a northern spy. Taste the diversity we're in danger of losing. You'll be casting an evolutionary vote for a more interesting world. Second, get your hands dirty. Plant something. It doesn't have to be a whole garden. It can be a single tomato plant on a balcony or an herb in a pot on your windowsill. When you take responsibility for the life of a plant, you start to see the world from its point of view. You notice the sun, the water, the soil, the insects. You become a participant in that ancient dance of coevolution, and you realize how deeply interconnected we all are. And finally, pay attention to your own desires. Notice how they shape the world. The food you choose to buy, the flowers you admire, the kind of order you seek in your life. These aren't small things. They're signals that ripple out into the world, shaping the fields of Idaho and the apple orchards of the future. You're an evolutionary force. Wield that power with awareness and care. This book is a beautiful reminder that we're not separate from nature. We're one of its most creative and most dangerous inventions. By understanding the botany of our own desires, we can learn to be a more graceful, more humble, and more intelligent partner in the great conversation of life on Earth. That was a summary of The Botany of Desire by Michael Pollan. We've touched on the main currents of this incredible book today, but I'll be honest with you, a summary is like looking at a map of a beautiful country. The real magic happens when you actually travel there yourself. It's in the quiet moments of reading, when a particular story or a simple phrase hits you in a way you didn't expect. This summary is designed to help you decide if this book is worth your time. If anything we've talked about today has sparked your curiosity, I urge you to grab a copy. Reading it isn't just about learning facts. It's an experience that can genuinely change the way you see your world, from the food on your plate to the very nature of your own mind. Also, if you found this journey valuable, please show your support by hitting that like button and subscribing to the channel. That way, you won't miss our next exploration into another life-changing book from the world's most fascinating bookshelves. Let's keep growing together.